Hello and welcome to the Read the Bible podcast, a resource from Imago Dei Church. This is episode 2 of our kind of endeavor as we are journeying through different books of the Bible, studying them, and seeking to know God through His Word. Every month, we're looking to roll out 2 podcasts, the first being a deep dive into a book, and the second where we interview someone from our community and hear from their experience reading it. Today, you'll hear from John Logie, who's the kids director and is a member at our church for quite some time. But for now, let's introduce myself. I'm Daniel Jansen, also known as DJ, and my lovely wife,
Crista Jansen.
Hey, babe. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We're adding something new today. We are also having a video component to this podcast. Does that make you nervous to know that you're being videotaped right now, or
Always.
is it exciting? Okay.
No, yeah. It's always nervous. I don't know what to do when there's a camera rolling, so.
All right. Well, just
great.
pretend it's not there, and I'll keep making jokes
Making it
that draw
awkward.
attention to it.
Thank you.
Hey, Crista, before we introduce John, before we dive too deep, first, actually, we want to give a shout out and thank Andy Fiera for helping hook everything up, record, make this happen. Urban Youth Workers Institute, the studio space here. I want to highlight Jason Smart for the original music. Also, this podcast is unofficially sponsored by Coffee Code of Norwalk, also known as Imago Dei Norwalk. You'll find someone there constantly. Crista, before we dive into the depths of today, we want to make sure people are knowing how to walk through this journey that we're on in reading the Bible. So how can we help people take those steps forward? What should they be looking for?
Yeah. So a couple of things just to go over. We have just launched the Bible reading plan. We're in February. So I know a lot of people were getting kind of the ball rolling here. Just to clarify on a couple of things for you guys. You'll notice that on the Bible reading plan, there are 25 days of reading. And that's intentional. We know that there are more than 25 days in a month, but we are only assigning 25 days because we want to give people space for weekends, space to catch up in case you fall behind. That's intentional so that you are not overwhelmed by having to read every single day. We just give 25 days so that it is a lot more achievable for you to do in a month. So don't freak out. We know how to count and we know our calendar.
We learned our numbers.
Yes, we do. Yeah. We know our months of the year, but that is honestly intentional for you guys just to keep that attainable for all of us as a community.
Yeah, I think that catching up is a key idea there. We want you to be encouraged as we go through this Bible reading journey. Every month, there's going to be a new book and a new opportunity to re-engage. So if you fall behind, there's always a fresh start the next month. But not only the next month, by only doing 25 days, there's always a fresh start and an ability to catch up and participate in this. So wherever you're kind of joining in on this Bible reading plan, we never want you to feel like, oh, I missed out and I can't hop in any longer.
Right, exactly. And you said it, DJ, like you could always just hop in on the next month too if you feel like you're too far behind or maybe you're new to our community, just jump in on that next month. But 25 days is to create good space for you guys. Secondly, if you're listening to the podcast, you already know this, but to find all the resources for the Bible reading plan, just go to that Imago Dei app. We have everything there. Also on our website, you will find the plan for every month. You will find these podcasts. You will find the video tutorial on how to go through the Bible study method. So check out the website, check out the app, and then also on YouTube, you can find these podcast recordings if you want to see our lovely faces.
Awesome.
You could do that on YouTube.
Well, speaking of lovely faces, I want to introduce our guest. We have John Logie with us. John, you want to say hi?
What's up?
Awesome, John. Now, John, before we started, I know Crista sent us a text saying, reminder, guys, you're going to be on camera. Don't look like a bum.
That's right.
She did say that.
And yet
Very
here you
Crista.
are. So tell me, what was your thought process waking up, as you got ready this morning, like with Krista's admonition not to look like a bum?
That was not a comment that John necessarily looks
No,
like a bum.
She knew I didn't need that comment.
Oh, is that for more for me?
He is-
I'm trying to drive clicks to our video so people see that this is not just an audio-only podcast. So
Right.
John does not look like a bum, but all right, John, you've been at the church, since 2017, I think is when you came, and you've been on the kids director for 3 years. So give us a little bit of insight into, your story. within our church community, and then we'll dive into Exodus, which is the book that we're reading this month.
Mm-hmm.
But what's some like your, I don't know, random memories, kind of highlights as you think through your time in our community? You're also on the staff team. If you want to give people a peek inside what it's like to be on our staff team and leading the kids ministry, just open it up a little bit. Tell us who you are and kind of like, specifically though, in your experience with our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, a big, huge thing that came out of me being a part of Imago Dei was meeting my wife, Carla.
Hey,
And getting to know her at Imago Dei, kind of accidentally getting to know her a little bit. I was going to invite someone to a book club that I was going to be hosting, and Carla just happened to be in that circle. And I try to be an includer by nature, and kind of did a pity invite to Carla.
Wow.
And, she came and to a book club on the Four Loves by C.S. Lewis, and one of those loves came to the top, and at the end of it, I asked her out. So had to wait to the last night in case she said no, and that would be awkward to
keep going to the book club.
Yeah, you want to come back to my mom and dad's house next week for next week of book club?
Yeah,
cool.
So the lesson learned there is always give the pity invite.
Always.
You never know what God will
You
do.
never
with
know.
You never know who you're inviting.
Yeah, there was no objective there. But that was a great gift out of it. So met Carla at Imago Dei, and I've been on staff team for the past 3 years. Staff team is a fun team, group of personalities. You got Edwin, who the running question is just like, where is Edwin? We never know.
Yeah.
You know he's doing something, but you don't know
always
what
on campus somewhere or meeting with someone.
He's like the most incredibly hardworking person I know.
But
we just never know.
We just don't know where he is.
I don't know. You got Crista, the admin, who apparently is the exact same work type as I am. We did like a work test, and we're the exact same, which is wild.
Which is the exact opposite
of you.
Of me. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. I don't know. I bring music to the staff team. It's like completely silent if I'm not in there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You always know John is working at Imago Dei. When you walk into the staff room and you hear Lord of the Rings playing in the background.
True.
Yeah.
Which I will quote.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, last thing, and we could dive in Exodus. Apart from just your connection to Imago Dei, just who are you? Something about what you love, what you're about, things that excite you. If someone's never met you, what should they know about John Logie?
Yeah. I grew up in Whittier and have lived there my whole life. One of the best cities in LA, I would say.
One of. Yeah. Maybe not like the best, but like it's like a top 30 for sure.
Yeah. Not too much of a fighter, but I just say it and let it stand. Come visit and you'll see. I have 4 siblings. My parents, Chris and Susan Logie, I love. Both, raised me to know and love Jesus. I am super into board games and disc golf. I love great stories like Lord of the Rings, Narnia, Harry Potter, Star Wars. I'm like a fandom dude. I even kind of jumped on Marvel. Didn't commit to the comics, but I can watch a movie.
Okay. Well, before we dive too deep into some of that, because I can immediately wanting to debate something. What do you think? We should probably dive into Exodus.
Yeah,
that's kind of the point of this podcast. Let's move on. Crista, why don't you lead us forward?
Yeah, no, before we get to Exodus, I think it's helpful for all of us who are listening or watching. What does reading the Bible look like for you, John? I think a lot of people struggle with just finding the rhythm to actually read the scriptures. And so I'm curious if you could share what does it look like for you? The successes, the struggles. What does reading the Bible look like? And kind of help give a practical picture of how do you get it done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it can change depending on the season that you're in. I definitely have had times where reading is challenging. The season I'm in right now, waking up earlier. Well, I was going to say earlier than Carla, but that's no competition. But waking up a little bit earlier before my day begins to read my Bible with like a cup of coffee, breakfast is like ideal for me, and trying to have time to not feel rushed and to read and like, ask questions of the text and that sort of thing. That doesn't always happen. I also really, really love the Dwell app, which is like basically like an audiobook app of the Bible and has a ton of different readers and different translations. And that is really refreshing for me and has been over the past couple years since I've started using that. And it also was a reminder of like, it's okay if I don't always like pick up my Bible. I want that to be the goal, and that's the ideal. But if I'm listening, like the Bible was read to people and it was an auditory thing passed on for so long, and I've always felt like if I didn't read, then it doesn't count. And like Dwell kind of opened my mind up to that, and just like the beauty of hearing like different voices reading the Bible to me and hearing it, and just like, that's a beautiful thing. So that's been really freeing and helped me to see the Bible in a new way and enjoy it. I also love audio books, and I don't know why that didn't translate for so long. But yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, John. I'm a big fan of the Joel app as well. One of my favorite things is hearing people from different countries and different accents read the scriptures. And it is a gift. So if you don't have the Joel app,
that's something to look into.
Plug.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good resource for your Bible reading journey. And thank you for sharing that. I think as we interview more people, we'll find that people have different habits around reading the Bible. And I think that hopefully that's encouraging if you're listening and you're struggling at some level. There's not a one size fits all for that. It's about the intentionality of carving out space more than it is about, it needs to be at this time or in this place. And you find that will look different for different people.
Absolutely.
Let's dive into a passage of Exodus. That's what we want to do when we have a guest here, is to say, hey, you've been reading. We want to hear from you and kind of your experience reading. So let's pick a passage and let's read it together or look at it together and talk around it. Crista, real quick, before we dive in there, you want to just give us a quick overview of the method that we're looking to participate in?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we study the Bible, we laid this out in our video tutorial, but if you haven't had a chance to watch it, it is on the handout, and this is just a reminder. So you sit down to read a passage, and there's three main components of studying the Bible: comprehension, interpretation, and application. And so with comprehension, that takes the bulk of your time. You read the passage, reread it maybe 2, 3, 4 times even if you can. And you're mainly just asking, what does it say? What is this saying? So you ask questions, you observe, and we're going to do that with John with a particular passage in Exodus that he selected to go through today. That's comprehension. What does it say? Secondly, you're going to go through interpretation. Okay, I know what it says. Now, what does it mean? And with interpretation, you want to try to come up with a 1 to 2 sentence, maybe summary. And then also you could come up with a big idea statement. So I know what it says. What does it mean? It means God is sovereign, or God this, or, whatever. A big idea of the passage. And then finally, the third thing in a Bible study is application, which is, how does it change me? Because we don't just read for head knowledge, we read for heart change. And so we always want to walk away with, how is this changing me? How is it shaping me? What do I do in response to how God has revealed himself through the pages of Scripture?
That's awesome. One thing you just said, Crista, that I want to highlight is you were talking about interpretation. You said, hey, I'm reading this and I'm observing all these things. What does it mean? Maybe it means God is sovereign. God is this. God is that. You kind of did it off the cuff. I don't even know that you meant to do this, but we want to teach what would be called God-centered interpretation.
Yeah.
The scriptures are about God and revealing who God is. The scriptures are not primarily about you. And so while there might be some application that obviously impacts your life and who you are and changes, but we don't want the interpretation part. That's usually not about you, actually. That's probably about who God is and what he's done. And as we interpret the Bible through a God-centered lens, that's actually where we're going to have the power to actually change. The power to actually live this out is when we see God at the center of all things, and specifically God working through Jesus in the gospel. All right, so John, let's turn to the passage you selected. John highlighted Exodus chapter 15, beginning in verse 22 through the end of 16. If time goes, I might throw in 17 for fun.
Sure.
But we're not going to have time to read all of that. It's a longer passage, but I'll catch us up, and then you can kind of take us in.
Do we know what day of reading this was?
Day 10.
Day
Day
10.
10.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
day
So
10
you have
reading.
your Bible reading plan. This is day 10's reading.
So on day 10, we read this, and catch you up in the story. So Exodus, the title, right, is about this exit, this rescue that God does. The people of Israel are enslaved. God powerfully works, makes promises, and powerfully works to bring his people out of Egypt. And he shows his glory to Pharaoh and to really the nations through all the works that he does to bring them out. And then it culminates in the Passover and this Red Sea moment where the sea is parted, Israel passes through, and then the sea collapses in on the Egyptian army. And God says, these Egyptians that you see today, you will never see again. And God works this powerful rescue. Chapter 15 opens with this song of celebration and worship. And it's this big rescue moment of all that's happened. And you're like, yeah, it's so exciting. You see all the drama that's been there. And then the passage you picked, I found kind of interesting. And I'm curious to know why this stood out to you. But what happens is immediately after this rescue, 3 days they travel, and they find themselves in the wilderness, and they're without water. And they're in this place called Marah, and they begin to grumble there and they complain. And then God provides some water for them. And then they go a little further, and then they're without food, and they begin to complain and cry out, and God provides food for them. I'm trying not to give too much away. I want you to lead us into this, but it's this immediate kind of lack right after this incredible blessing and rescue. And so the story is they're on this journey, but yes, they got rescued, but now they find themselves in the middle of the wilderness, and it's this big kind of like, well, now what?
Now what?
Kind of moment.
Right.
So let's walk through the comprehension, interpretation, application of this passage. Crista, I'll let you kind of drive, but John, we want you to be the one that kind of takes us through it.
Yeah. So, John, as you read through this particular passage in the Bible reading plan, going through comprehension first, what were things that stood out to you? What did you take note of, and what did you observe? Kind of walk us through your process in this.
Yeah, so some of the first things I noticed were some repeated phrases. Right off the bat, as DJ was saying, like God has just taken the people out of, just this crazy time in Egypt, and then they come and they're thirsty and they start grumbling. And then as I read, I just noticed like how often the word grumbling is repeated in this like passage. It's repeated 9 times that I counted, which is a lot of grumbling or pointing to grumbling.
Right.
And yeah, so that was one repeated phrase. I think we can talk about more about that. But and then I saw with the grumbling, in response, repeated phrases of God has, like, the Lord has heard. The Lord listens, and like seeing the Lord provide in response to the grumbling. I saw a repeated phrase of God saying that he would like test them, which I thought was really interesting, and that was a curiosity for me of like, why is he testing them, and like how? Those are in verse 25 and later, and 26 of, verse 25 of 15. And then also a repeated phrase of "you shall know as the Lord," which I know in episode 1 of the podcast, Crista, you alluded to, like that was a repeated phrase through Exodus, showing like, this is the Lord, and we're gonna see who God is through this book, and He's gonna show His people who He is. So those are some repeated phrases.
Yeah, I think that's a really great place to start, John. Like, I think that one of the simplest ways that you can do comprehension in studying the Bible is looking for repeated words. An author is very intentional in how they write. And so if you see a word or an idea that is repeated over and over again, it's very intentional because they're trying to draw your attention to it. And then you kind of alluded to this, John, when you were going through those repetitions. You saw grumbling, you saw God's response, that he would always respond with listening, providing. You saw the repetition of testing, knowing that the Lord is God. And then you alluded to this, which I thought was great, of you saw the testing and asked yourself, why is God testing them? And how is he testing them? And I think that is taking that comprehension just one level deeper, which sometimes we could just stop at the observations of repetition, but going one step deeper of, oh, that's really curious. Why would God do that? And how is he doing that? So as you asked that, did you come up with any answers to that question as you were reading through this passage?
Yeah. So as I read, I saw that, he says he's going to test them to see like if they will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do that which is right in his eyes. This is verses 26. And he tells them to gather only a day's portion when it comes to like the manna and him providing food for them. I just saw both in the water that he provides and the manna, the food that he provides, that he's like teaching them like dependency to like walk with him and walk nearly with their Lord. And he's teaching them like, a relationship of dependence, that like he is God and they are not, that he's faithful to provide. Like he's just taken them out of slavery. And he's going to like continue to be their God. And to be with them, even when they grumble, you know.
As you're saying this might be pushing us too far ahead, Crista. Sorry, but I was thinking, why is dependence even a virtue? You know, like why teach? Don't we want to teach independence? You know, like why is God teaching dependence? That'd be a question I would have as you're sitting there and saying, oh, maybe that's what he's doing is he's teaching them dependence. Like, okay. Fine, but why teach dependence?
Yeah.
What is it about that? What do you think?
Totally. Yeah, I think like God has walked the people through Egypt, he provided like even in Genesis, the closing chapters of Genesis, like placing Joseph, which was alluded to earlier in episode 1, putting
You're
Joseph.
good. You're good at the plugs, man. I like this.
Listen to episode 1.
Yeah, listen back if you haven't. Putting Joseph in Egypt, providing for Israel, bringing them there, like saving a whole people that were going to die from like starvation and lack of food. And he's just been so faithful with his people. And now he's redeemed them out of slavery. Like there is a very clear relationship of like God being in control and God leading, and the people like needing their God. And like a relationship of need, that he is the good God who brings them out. And so that's just one picture of that. I mean, there's a lot more, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as I was even asking the question, I was thinking, why is dependence a virtue? It's like, well, because you are dependent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, and we have this temptation to think that we can do it on our own. One of my, like the observations I have when I read this that always kind of cracks me up is in chapter 15, where they're complaining about what shall we drink, what shall we drink? And there's two things. One is to say, throw this log into the water and that will make it sweet. And it's like, well, the log is already there. Like God's already actually provided the means before they even got there, for that. And then secondly, at the end of chapter 15, it says, they came to Elim where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. And it's like, when they started complaining, like, why didn't God just take them to Elim right away? You know what I mean? Like there was no, like he's teaching them something about who he is. It's not the destination. Like your hope is not in Elim. Your hope is not in the springs of water.
Yeah.
It's in me. And there's temptation that we have to trust in our circumstances and to look, I'm getting moving into interpretation. I'm sorry, maybe I'll slow it down. I'm getting all fired up and preachery.
I know, it's Exodus.
Yeah.
It's
So,
good.
the provision was already there, but he was saying, I'm the provision, not this external thing.
Yeah, I love that too. And even at the end of 15, like when they go to Elim, 12 springs of water, 70 palm trees, like there's a picture of abundance that he's showing them. Like not only am I providing for you, but like it's out of abundant love
Yeah.
for you too,
Right.
that I have to give.
Yeah, it's lavish and extravagant,
Mm-hmm.
more than enough. Yeah, this is great. Anything else that you observed in comprehension, John, that you want to just point out before we move on to interpretation?
Yeah, in comprehension, other things I was looking for, like who is God? He says of himself at the end of chapter 15, I'm your healer. And then I just seeing like throughout this whole passage, the Lord providing, and that the Lord is faithful. The Lord listens like to the peoples and even my own grumbling. Yeah, the Lord is powerful. Like he shows miracles, like bread literally falls from heaven.
Yeah.
And he's great. And he loves from an abundance without lack. And he gives us rest too. So those are some things just of asking, like, who is God? Who am I
Yeah.
seeing him to be?
Yeah, that's great. Even as you were reading those, John, I just felt my heart being filled with each attribute, and everything that you see of God in this passage is like, oh yes, like, yes, that is our God. And I love kind of just like a quick teaching note on this, but when you're looking for attributes of God, sometimes when you're reading a passage, it's very literal. Like you mentioned, God said, I am healer. And it's like, great. We can find those and it's like, check, God is healer. But also there is this, what you did of this comprehension of, as you read through this whole story, it's, whoa, God is a provider. Now it doesn't literally say God is the provider, but you see that attribute of God played out in this narrative and in this story. And so for our listeners, as you're reading, sometimes when you're reading, you'll see literal statements of God's character, but just because there's nothing literal about who God is, you're always going to find something about who God is through what is being communicated. And so when you take the time to sit, to read, to think, like you did, John, I mean, just like, oh, God is a listener. He's a provider. He is strong, and it just like, wow, there is so much to see of who our God is in just these few pages.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Are we going to push this forward then in
Yeah.
terms of, so we've made these observations about the character of God. We've noticed the grumbling thing. I was already getting excited and kind of pushing this forward.
I know you were starting to the interpretation.
I know.
DJ.
So
I restrained myself, but
all right, well, help us out then.
So moving forward, so we did this comprehension, John,
Right.
really good examples of just things that you've pulled out, made note of as you were reading. And then interpretation, how did you kind of pull this together? What was the big idea that you kind of get from this passage? Or how did you summarize, what does it actually mean?
Yeah. I went from like two angles. One summarizing, I just saw that people grumbled despite God's proven faithfulness. And then yet God listened and provided from his abundant, steadfast love so that they would know again that he is the Lord. That was like just seeing as I walked through the passage, summarizing like what had happened. Just, them forgetting and then him walking through again his faithfulness.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, a couple things I love about that summary is one of their constant forgetfulness. One of my things when I read Exodus is just constantly getting mad at the Israelites. You're just like, what is wrong with you?
Right.
And then I read it and then you stop and it's like, oh, I do that all the time. I always forget God's provision. I always forget what God has done for me. And I could easily be the one that he just led through the Red Sea. And then, but I'm hungry. Where's my food?
That's
what are you going to do now?
My wife saying, where's my food? I'm hungry. Krista.
I know. I'm always hungry, always cold, always tired. That's pretty much my life. But yeah. And so I just love that you pulled that. Even though they forgot, God still provides. Like, it's not dependent on their faith. And it's not dependent on their work. It was dependent on God. And then I also love that you included John at the end there. It was so that they would know he is the Lord. It's not just that he provides. He does provide because he loves, and he does provide because he is God. But ultimately, he wants us to know who he is, to know his character and his heart, to reveal himself. And so I love that you were able to include all those elements of the passage there in your summary.
Yeah. As you say that, before we move forward to like application, I think it's important to one of the reasons we're starting with Exodus is that this is one of the, if not the foundational story for the whole Bible that everything keeps drawing back on. And the Bible is integrated. And so as you're sitting there and kind of making these interpretations based on what we're reading, you're making an interpretation about the human condition. That's one of the things that you're seeing and sitting there and saying, hey, prone to grumble, prone to what have you done for me lately? That this is something that's this insecurity that is kind of at work in our heart, and that God showing himself over and over again faithful. And he shows himself faithful here in Exodus, but as we pull the story, forward and we kind of have a whole Bible interpretation, this is one of those foundational stories in the whole Bible. I wouldn't want people to miss that, that this language of grumbling comes up over and over again. And even like you could look at Jesus's temptation in Matthew chapter 4 and Luke chapter 4. Jesus's temptation calls back to this grumbling kind of moment. It's temptation over food and water, right? That's one of the key.
While he's in the wilderness.
Right? That's not by accident, right? He is being faithful where Israel was unfaithful. We just read in Philippians chapter 2. We're preaching through Philippians right now as a church. He says, dealing with a grumbling, or is it disputing? I think it was. Yeah, and that's calling back to this. The grumbling is not just like, I'm murmuring, I'm kind of angry about things. No, it's this distrust of God in the midst of circumstances that seem like they're kind of, out to get you a little bit. And so there's this kind of theme that's at work where Jesus is faithful, where we have been faithless, and where there's the human condition of our kind of like falling into this thing that Jesus rescues us of, and then also the faithfulness of God is seen ultimately, right? John 5, the bread from heaven, right? The manna is Christ himself, right? Yeah. So like he is our provision, our faithfulness. Like that's like what we see and hear in this moment, God has done like on a larger scale in Christ.
Yeah. No, it's good, DJ. Yeah, I appreciate you noting that and making sure that we see that whole picture through all scriptures, because Exodus is intentional. It's foundational to everything else we'll be reading this year, but just through your life when you're reading the scriptures. So, John, let's get to application. So we walked through your comprehension, your interpretation, pulling it all together. How did this change you? What did you walk away with for your own heart and your own life?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like just seeing the people's grumbling, and when it says the people grumbled, it says the people grumbled against Moses, and then people grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and then Moses later points that out to them, like, why are you grumbling against us? Do you realize like you're actually grumbling against the Lord?
Yeah.
And so I just like noted that like grumbling is not against like a person or circumstances, but it reveals a distrust and forgetfulness of God's promised and proven love and faithfulness. And like even in my life, when I like grumble or like have a spirit of like, I don't know, ungratitude, like
sure, that's a word.
Yeah, it works.
When I'm like distrustful, it actually reveals something deeper in my heart, that I'm distrustful of like of God who like is the giver and like creator and like the lover of my heart, and that he has like no lack for me in him. And if I'm looking to like circumstances or someone else, like that is not going to satisfy me. And he's trying to lead me into deeper like dependence and relationship with him that will never fail.
Yeah, that's good, John. Yeah, I think that's great. It's like I said, I read Exodus and I'm always angry at the Israelites, and it's just human nature that we always forget the provision of God and the lavishness of his grace and his love. And I really appreciate you walking through with us how you processed this particular passage. I think it's helpful, hopefully, for our listeners as we walk through this, of just this is what it could look like as you study the Bible. And if you did read day 10 of Exodus, maybe you came to similar conclusions. Hopefully, I think you probably did. But I'm sure application always has a very unique turn for each person, because we all struggle to trust God in different areas of our lives. We struggle with forgetfulness in different places. And so our comprehension and interpretation should be pretty similar if we're doing this properly, but that application, each of us are different, and we carry different sins, different burdens, different idolatries. And so even though the main idea is going to be the same idea, how it fleshes out for each of us is going to be different in different contexts. So I really appreciate you sharing all that.
Yeah, even as you say that, Krista, where our interpretation might be very similar and the application in general might be similar, but we all are living different lives. You know, I'm cheating throughout this because we preach Exodus, so I have like my sermon notes that I'm able to go back,
DJ.
you know, over and over again. But you know what's interesting, babe, is I'm looking at this, and you talk about moments in life and how we apply things. I'm looking at this and some of the notes that I have from when we walked through this. You and I just walked through our second miscarriage right at the time that we had preached this, and I actually have something that you wrote at that point. You wrote in your journal, and you shared with me, and I'm sharing this now with the whole world. But
at least the Imago Dei.
At least the Imago Dei world. But no, we've talked about this, so I know this isn't.
No, you're good.
But you wrote, the pilgrimage to eternity is long and difficult. Jesus guaranteed that there will be pain and tribulation, but he also promised that he would never leave me or forsake me. In my greatest pain, I see my greatest beauty, Jesus. When I am broken and have nothing left, I am left with only Jesus, and Jesus is all my heart needs. I remember you and I just talking and processing in that moment after back-to-back miscarriages. It's like bitterness is like all there was, you know, and to not like lie about that or like pretend that it was something better than what it was. It wasn't sweet, you know, and there was no clarity on how God was at work. And yet there was God's provenness that he brings beauty, that he is for our good, that even when we can't see it, that we are called to trust him in those things. And so the phrase I wrote down in my notes then was like, bitterness may be bitter, but it doesn't need to make us bitter. If that makes sense. Like it's okay to say this is bitter. I don't know where water's coming from. I don't know where there's food. I don't, you know what I mean? And we don't need to lie about those things necessarily, but that doesn't produce a grumbling and complaining and bitterness in our own heart. Embrace trial as an opportunity to learn of God's good purposes. And that's going to have a million different applications for your life. John, as we kind of come to a close here, man, just kind of zooming back out, last words, your experience thus far in Exodus, what's God been teaching you? How's your experience been? Give us kind of your final like overview thought of what this has been.
Yeah, I mean, I love the film The Prince of Egypt.
So good.
Such a jam.
And such a jam.
It's great film score there. And it always like reminds me that the burning bush like happens in chapter 3. That it's like such a climactic moment in like that film or whatever. And like this like the story of Exodus, but there's like so much more that goes like after that of God's like leading and like him revealing like his deepest nature. And like that is like, I don't know, the beautiful like reflection and takeaway for me that has been for Exodus. Like that God is revealing himself and like wants to be known, and that he's a loving God that is like relational with his people. And he provides for our needs, like not our greed, but like leads us to know him.
That's good. He rides for our need, not our greed. I like that, John. God reveals himself and wants to make him known. I think that would be our prayer for ourselves and for our church as we are on this journey of studying the scriptures, is that we would encounter the living God through them. Krista, you want to give us just a quick shout out? Where are we heading next in our Read the Bible journey?
Yes. So next month, the month of March, we will be reading through the book of Mark. So we're going to jump out of the Old Testament, go to the New Testament, still a narrative, but New Testament narrative, a gospel of Mark, life and ministry of Jesus. If you are like me, I always like to get these guys. If you are watching, these are the scripture journals. So you could go ahead and order yours for Mark so that you're ready when it comes. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, looking forward to that as well. If you're listening to this, it's not too late to hop into Exodus, or if you want to make a plan to hop in starting in
March 1st.
with March 1st with the Gospel of Mark. All the resources will be on the website, on the app. But that's it for here. John, thank you so much for joining us and leading us. And it's so beautiful hearing what God's doing in your heart. Andy, thank you for helping make this happen. Again, Jason with the score. Crista for being beautiful and wonderful
Always.
and smart and funny and marrying me.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Here's how we view like True Love Reports podcasts together. So catch you next time on the Read the Bible podcast. And until then, grace and peace.